got us sorted out here, so.
All right, so we'll get started. First thing we need to do, since we have Zoom members, we'll do a roll call. We'll start with
Sean?
Sean Sullivan,
Here.
Richard Smith,
Evan Folds.
guys on Zoom.
Jessica Cannon,
PJ Klein.
Kat, are you present?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said Catherine Pullman, but I am present as well.
Okay, that sounds good. So we'll move to item 1, approval of last month's minutes. Are there any questions, concerns, addendums to that? Nope. Okay. Anyone want to make a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second? And we have to do a roll call vote on that. I think.
Okay, approve.
Aye.
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 All right, unanimously approved. We'll move on to item number 2, energy and efficiency and conservation block grant. So I will turn that over to Dave.
Yeah. Just wanted to make everyone aware of the new block grant that's just been released. They, in the last week or two, they officially opened the portal for submitting grant applications. The actual submission window is going to be very broad. I mean, the applications will be accepted all the way, through 2024 kind of time period. So there's different phases that they're going to be taking applications, depending on who you are and what type of project you're going to pursue. But I just wanted to just kind of go over just some of the, kind of the, I don't know, 10,000 foot view of the grant and the opportunities that that it will present for Wilmington, and different types of projects that the grant will be applicable for. So I think I provided it as item 2B, but I thought we just probably should have put that as 2A, but just to kind of look at the funding level that's going to be available to Wilmington, and this was all per, this is a non-competitive grant, so this is funding that Wilmington's going to be will be available to Wilmington. So you see on like that second page of item 2B, I think I've got highlighted the allocation that Wilmington's going to be receiving. It's like $172,690. So it's not a huge amount, but certainly not insignificant as well. Spend towards different project types. This grant is going to be available. So. Any questions, comments there so far?
Do you have any initial thoughts on what you or the city would like to use the grant money for?
No, so I think we kind of take a look through the various project types here going forward, and yeah, would certainly, that's kind of why we're bringing it forward to this group, is to kind of get some feedback. I will say there's definitely a big Justice 40 component to any of these. While this funding is allocated as they're direct grants, so it's not competitive. We don't have to compete for this money with other cities. There will still be an application process. You have to submit like a plan on how you're going to spend the money. So you have to, you can't just say, yes, send us the money.
Yeah.
You do kind of have to have the project identified and how you're going to spend the money. That Justice 40 component comes into it, so that the funding will be going to minority and disadvantaged neighborhoods. Communities. So it's definitely an opportunity to work with, local nonprofits or other community organizations in Wilmington to meet some of those Justice 40 commitments. So that will be one area we really need to drill down into it.
How much money did you say it was going to be?
172,000.
Okay.
How did we get allocated Greensboro, for example, not? That work?
If you're not getting like a direct allocations identified on here, there is the opportunity to work with the state energy office, who will be distributing some additional funds. So, they certainly couldn't provide funds for every single city, township, or across the country. So some, I think they try to do the major urban areas. And other cities will have other opportunities and methods for pursuing the funds. So some of the funds will be distributed straight to the states, and they can allocate it to other communities, such as Greensboro. Which community did you ask about?
I didn't see Greensboro. I was just curious how we got.
Yeah, I don't know if it's what was on population size or what.
Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, and I just included a couple of the pages, in this handout here. There was a listing of a bunch of other communities as well, so perhaps I don't know if they were missed, but
They may be on page 28.
yeah. I just provided like the cover page and then the page that Wilmington was on, so. I think the links that I sent when I sent out the agenda
Full list.
had the full list on there, so if you want to refer back to that, perhaps they were on it. It was like, 30 something pages, so. So yeah, that's part of the application process. We'll have to provide a plan through the project. So again, the application process is open for like 2 years. So we'll have plenty of time to identify a worthwhile project. So why don't we go back to item 2A then, which I provided several pages again of just kind of information on the grant. So that first page under 1.0, the purpose is again to reduce fossil fuel emissions, reduce total energy use of eligible entities, which as a local government we are. Improve energy efficiency in the transportation sector. So again, it's not focused on just buildings. You could do things like installing EV charging stations. And building a clean and equitable energy economy. And that's where it kind of touches on those Justice 40 initiatives. So there's a chapter area on that in the grant information application.
Can I ask you, you guys, both of you, Davids, so when money comes like this down from on high, is it strategic to maybe try to target or tie it to something that would be politically more difficult to do versus easy to do with or are they going to apply their ideology to everything equally? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, is there something that would be harder for the city to allocate its own funds for, that we should maybe narrow down a few things that would be very desirable from our perspective, but might be a heavier political lift? Or does all money sort of get treated equally, whether it comes from our own coffers or whether it comes from a grant?
I think somewhat it may depend on the source of that revenue. The most recent example is all the ARPA funding that we got following the pandemic. And there was definitely an interest to make sure that those funds were applied to help the community. I mean, that's a large part of the reason that we got those funds. Not sure that would be the same story here. I could certainly talk with Tom and get his read on the situation and bring that back to the group if that's maybe something that we ought to consider when we're talking about what we ought to use it for. But
Got
I do think you make a good point that it's certainly easier to tackle problems that are not necessarily in the main streamline of what we would want to tackle with regular taxpayer dollars, or excuse me, our local taxpayer dollars, if somebody else is offering. So that's a very legitimate point of view.
Something to just keep in mind, so.
Did you have something in mind?
No, I just know that some of this, if we could have, in a perfect world, we'd be moving quickly to, accomplish all 4 of these goals listed right here. But money is, a rate limiting step, and sometimes ideology is too, especially when it comes to the, EJ stuff. So it's just something to keep in mind. And maybe once we get through this budget process, if there was something that got axed. And I know that doesn't usually happen. Usually the recommendations from the different departments go through because it's all sort of worked out ahead of time. But, maybe there was something that we were hoping to see them do and they didn't do it. And then we could circle back and say, well, let's use this grant money. So just something to think about. I know everybody is on the same page in terms of, we as a country are going to try to go more green, but once you get past that stage, there's a lot of arguing that happens. So just a thought to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Point.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica. Moving on to the following pages, and it lists a number of different activities that the grant can be applied for, and these are kind of broad areas again. Communities are certainly have the opportunity to provide kind of something more specific outside of these guidelines necessarily, but these are kind of some of the key areas that the program is identifying. So there's like 15 different items here I think I had highlighted. Don't necessarily have to go through each one of them, but there's certainly things like putting solar panels on top of facilities to increase our use of renewable energy would be available. You could do things like if we wanted to identify a climate plan or formulation of energy efficiency and energy usage goals. We could hire a consultant to help with that process. Just doing energy audits across our own facilities. Again, you could either have the funds to provide staff to do it yourself, or hire an outside agency to help with energy audits. These are all kind of their, I would say, bucket list areas to spend the grant funding.
Given we had 2 years, what do you imagine the process would look like to evaluate this, make a decision? Will we touch base on it once a quarter, meeting one time? How do you?
Yeah, I would definitely see it being kind of on until we decide on a project. I could see it coming up, as we hit benchmark decision points. I don't know if we would need to bring it up every meeting here or not, but just
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I guess I'm just wondering what the process would be. We're learning about it. Maybe next meeting we generate ideas. I don't know, just trying to put a face on it a little bit, because I really like the idea of hiring a consultant to evaluate the cost benefit analysis. That is maybe of a different type than we're used to approaching, something that shows us it's not profitable, just, can be profitable to do the right thing, for example, I think it would be a good case study for that. And then certainly along the lines of maybe what Jessica's proposing, that sometimes that's not deemed feasible in traditional budgets. And then the idea of a pilot project around a building possibly. I mean, what comes up is, do we actually have I imagine we would, but I'm gonna say it this way anyway, do we have a building that fits within our vision of what we're gonna need to do to meet our goal? You know what I mean? Like, is there a building that sits in that posture? We might not even know the posture we need to sit in to do that. Maybe that's part of the exercise. It's getting to a point of saying, basically, if we're gonna do what we're saying we have to do by this date, our buildings need to look like this, and then use the money to make a building look like that. I think of that building at Georgia Tech, there's a name for it, I can't remember, but it's a project at the university that made a completely self-sufficient building. I heard of that. It's a pretty cool project. It's like way over the top. I mean, it's in a sense,
It's like
I mean, I guess
like a
we're gonna
living
get to
building
that.
challenge. Yeah.
Maybe it was something like that, but we don't need to go that far necessarily, but it would be really neat to kind of carve out a case study, pilot project type scenario. Maybe I'm getting ahead of the game, but that's a couple of thoughts that come to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think the first step is what we're doing right now is presenting this info to you guys to chew on for a bit and think about. I think following this one, I'll bounce off some of the city leadership with ENT, if we kind of identify some possible project areas we want to pursue. I know, and we talked, the last meeting was doing a budget request for the fleet sustainability plan. I think this would probably fit in there.
Yeah, it's pretty much there on 38. On page 38, it says develop fleet replacement plan, including stakeholder engagement and
Yep.
input, and it says procurement, legal and technical support to purchase EVSE. So
Yeah, so the previously recommended fleet budget transition type.
I would eventually, because we did include a budget request that was submitted January 31st on time. We included that request phased over 2 years. And I'll guarantee you when this discussion comes up, that's going to be at least discussed.
Yeah.
In terms of providing funding for that, so.
I think we mentioned that in the budget request actually too, that we would look at grant opportunities to support that request. So,
Do we have a list of all the projects that we want to do? The city wants to do that meet this criteria in the next year, and then a 5-year plan of projects, so that we can at least get an idea of what already is likely to be funded versus what probably won't make the list. So we can, I mean, I'm not gonna tell you, hey, let's go replace all the streetlights with LEDs. We're already doing that, right? That's one of the things that's on this list. But we can at least try to cross-reference and say, hey, these things are already funded and this grant money doesn't really help us for this project, but here's these projects that we think it was kind of what Jessica was asking. We haven't got funded, or it's in our 5-year plan, and this grant money will help us either pull it up or do it in general.
In my mind, again, this is very wide and like there's,
Extremely.
number of options we could be interested in. And my first impression would be kind of along the same lines as what Jess said, where, like a vehicle pilot program is flashy. It looks good. Politically, I feel like the city would probably want to do that because it's something that they can show off. They can say, look, we have these EV cars that we're putting out on the road and they're out about town and they're green and this, that, and the other thing. Things like energy audits.
Not very sexy.
Right, energy audits, energy efficiency plans, time schedules for our lighting, or time schedules for our HVAC systems, those kind of things. They're not flashy. They're not gonna make a splash. The city council, I don't think, is gonna be particularly interested in showing those things off and not big press releases. But they are big dollars as far as savings, usage reduction goes. So my initial thought is, if you were to follow the train of thought that, we want to try and funnel this money into something that might otherwise be kind of harder to get approved, something that's on the more not flashy, but more, biggest bang for your dollar would be a good way to look at investing or utilizing this grant money.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that the city had on their plan that we don't think was gonna be funded, and this would help us get over the hurdle. I may have missed it. Does the city council, I'm assuming the answer is yes, but the city council has to approve the application of the block grant?
Definitely.
Okay. So that aligns with this needs to be something that is visible.
Yes. Yeah, and to your earlier question, PJ, no, we don't, I wouldn't say we have a list yet. That could certainly be part of this project to see kind of what's on the city project list and which of those align with the requirements of this grant. Kind of use that as a cross-reference list. So that's certainly something that we could develop as part of this decision process.
I think a big part of that would be looping in with facilities, and seeing like what upcoming facilities projects or needs, whether it's equipment replacement or whatever it might be, is also on the books are already, not just necessarily for this grant, but just as far as, we've talked about building policies, lead sustainability initiatives and those kind of things. So knowing what facilities has coming down their pipeline as far as whether it's equipment upgrades, building retrofits, those kind of things. It's not, even if it's not our, not necessarily our money, so not our decision, but just having your voice heard as another seat at the table when those decisions are being made, I think is a good opportunity as well.
Coming out of left field on this one, but what if the city is still in conversations with buying the PPD building? This funds may help modernize that building. I don't even know where that conversation ended or if it's ended.
It's just beginning, actually. We're right now into the very beginning of a 120-day due diligence process for that building. So we've got somewhat less than 120 days to figure out whether or not
You want it.
it's going to happen.
Does this money, I don't know if this money helps. And I mean, I don't know what the efficiency of that building is or anything, but would this money help at all? I have no idea, but that should be something we should at least think about.
Yeah, not to dissuade your idea, PJ, but I think that process it's away from the dock, it's off out to sea, and it's got its course.
Okay.
I'm not sure how we would benefit now if the purchase does go through and we do find an opportunity within that building, then yes, I agree 100%. This could help make it more efficient if that were necessary, but
Okay.
to get to that process, I'm not sure it fits.
That's fine.
I don't know the financials, but I would assume a purchase on that scale, 170 grand, isn't gonna make a huge dent one way or another, I don't know.
Probably not.
But just guessing from the real estate prices, that probably wouldn't make a huge impact or a big decision maker.
Hey, Dave, can I just ask, what do you think the odds are of that going through? And I still don't understand the city's main motivation. Are they like a buyer of last resort? What's going on with that thing? I know, you like it when I do this too. I know you love it.
One of the main purposes is to provide a campus for centralizing city services that doesn't exist right now.
Got it.
There was actually a space needs study that was done that would replace the building that we're sitting in right now with the new campus. that would house a whole bunch of departments that currently are scattered. And this solves that problem for less money than what the space needs study told us it would cost to demolish this building and then build something that we needed. So that cost was like $90 to $95 million, and we're currently looking at less than 70 at the old PPD building.
When was that study done? I know this isn't our thing, I'll let it go, but just out of curiosity, when was that space needs study done?
Within the past year.
Oh, how convenient, got it, okay, thanks.
Yeah, and and just keep in the back of your minds with, all of these projects, kind of how and to what degree it ties back in with the Justice 40 requirements of the other grants, so.
Not to fall further down that rabbit hole, just out of curiosity, with that study, did they identify if they were to centralize to a campus, are we able to then decommission other properties? Or like sell off, are there other properties that
6 buildings.
would, okay. Well, that's- yeah. From a use standpoint, you'd have to look into it, but from a use standpoint, that could be a big help energy efficiency wise. Okay.
Be an impact there.
So I assume New Hanover has some money from this as well. It's not on this couple of pages.
I don't
I
think,
don't think so. I don't think it's going to count. I think
yeah,
it's going to
it's,
local.
Okay, because it says counties, but is that, I don't know if that's different states.
I don't remember seeing New Hanover like on that list.
I think
Because I was just wondering if they were included, maybe you want to work with them a little bit just to make sure you aren't, pursuing the same thing or similar things.
I know there has been some talk in regards to local governments throughout the state combining their funds into, there's a lot of talk right now, and I think there's actually movement in regard to a North Carolina Green Bank at this, at kind of at the state level. And there's been talk about local governments, do we want to look at everybody combining their funds into this green bank and using it to really have an impact across the state, as opposed to whether that's funding energy efficiency improvements and residential and commercial sector, but so that's very, very early stage, but those conversations have kicked around. So, but the whole green bank thing is in its infancy as well, but I think they have named a person to lead that effort at the state level, so definitely following along with how that progresses. So, and whether individual cities decide to combine funds is beside the point. It sounds like this green bank is going to happen regardless, based on some federal funding supported. So it's going to be an interesting development regardless. See where that could provide low interest loans for commercial buildings to fund energy efficiency improvements or renewable energy projects. So great development all along with this, how that progresses. Other states have done that with really good success. So I think it's a long time here in North Carolina, opportunities that we have for projects here in the state.
Dave, was there a timeline associated with this about spending? Can you recall?
They've gotten there since they released it. With the application period being open for a couple of years here, identify how quickly you need to spend the funds yet. Any other questions on the grant? One other thing I want to mention, so this, they list these 14 or 15 project areas. Then I think Richard mentioned some of the areas that I have identified, which are listed on, they're numbered pages 37, 38. Those are what they call their blueprint topics. So, and with those, they actually kind of identify the key activities to utilize. So if you choose to participate in one of the blueprint topics, there's like expedited review of the application and just kind of a more streamlined process as far as getting the actual funding. So if you choose one of the blueprint topics, it's a bit more of a efficient way of getting the funding to kickstart the program.
So do we owe you a recommendation next meeting? Like, obviously, there's no action from us today. Does that mean there's action from us next meeting?
I think that goes back to Evan's question. And I would just suggest that y'all as a committee kind of prioritize what y'all thought was the highest priority recommendations from the ad hoc task force report. And I would think about those as it relates to how it relates to what programs, these blueprint programs that are offered under this grant.
It doesn't have to be a blueprint, but
No, I understand. It doesn't have to be, but
Mhm.
that's just a way for you to think about it. Does it have to be a recommendation at the next meeting? No, it does not.
No problem.
But you know, this money's there. Our process to go through the application, we'll have to submit a council agenda item. And then once they act, which typically it's at least probably six weeks to a month to 6 weeks to actually accomplish that. And then we'll have to formally file the application. And then when the award comes in, we have to go back and appropriate the money. So all of that takes time. I just, as we go into this thought process about whatever recommendations y'all want to present, just remember that's on the tail end of whatever it ends up being that we decide.
Okay,
Maybe this should be clear at this point. You said the money is there. Is it actually there to be spent already?
Pending government approval.
Correct.
Maybe that just one more time around the track with that. Like, when does it come available? It says we have 2 years, but does that mean?
It's available now. We just have to submit a request that says this is what we want to spend it on. And the government entity has to say, yes,
And then
this
we
is
go
an
to
acceptable
council.
use.
Correct.
Got it. So there's no, we can go ahead and start thinking about making decisions since we're on route. Right?
We can
Not that
go,
we need to rush or anything like that, but like
there's a 2-year rush. So.
I'm clear now, yeah, that's all.
But, so yeah, that's how much we're eligible to spend or to obtain. And we just have to fall, our ask has to fall within their guidelines. And for y'all's perspective, the ask has to fall within your guidelines. Right? So we just gotta make the two mesh up the way that the committee, should.
I mean, for the Justice 40 initiative, what do you guys see in here? I mean, I see this training of a workforce, which could be good. But if you were to try to steer it towards that, I mean, putting solar panels on something maybe doesn't really reach that. I mean, I know it's still worth pursuing, but.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of following that same train of thought you are. Like, I don't have experience with justice with so that's definitely not my specialty, but like, just as a layman looking at it, I see a very narrow range of things where if we're talking about improving efficiency or energy conservation for government facilities or services, how we can use that to bump up the Justice 40 part, like how those two can tie together. To me, they don't. Just again, as a layman who doesn't really know anything about that, like, just looking at them, I don't see the like common threads between the two very easily.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, an area we'll have to get some guidance on.
Okay.
Look at examples of what other communities are doing
Sure.
perhaps. Yeah.
I think-
Sometimes. Go ahead, Ken.
I think the way that our former resiliency coordinator with, I think it was the county, put it, was that anything that we do in our community that makes it easier, especially in the face of, you know, hurricanes or any kind of like outage, or do energy focus on those areas that would be outlined in 40 is a good reason to do the work. If they can, you know, take their focus away from these large buildings that, you know, we would be prioritized for, and kind of reallocate that time to making sure that everyone in the community has power faster, that can be justified as Justice 40 work.
I also was thinking, I'm very much spitballing here, but you guys know I love to do this, but anything that requires people who, Dave, I don't know if something comes to mind, but I'm thinking of CFPUA, you know, our financially challenged folks who have trouble paying their bills. A lot of times they have to drive over and pay cash at the last minute, or if they're at risk of having a disconnection, a lot of times they have to get in their car or get on a bus. I'm wondering if there's anything routinely that draws in lower income folks having to physically come into the city. You know, maybe spending this money on a really great new electronic platform where people could online take care of a problem rather than require a visit to a city facility. And I don't even know if you have that profile, if there are low-income people having to frequently jump on a bus or get in their car to come see you or not, but that might be a one-time electronic fix that we could consider. It would fall into that category.
Yeah, great ideas. Exactly why we wanted to put it in front of y'all, to hear some of these thoughts. And I know one project that I know comes to mind is, you know, we had looked at the MLK gym expansion for putting, you know, solar on top of that facility. You know, and using that facility as well as that project, as part of it already has like a community kitchen aspect that they're trying to include as well as part of that gym expansion project over there. And I know they're facing a budget shortage because of increased construction costs over there. So, you know, I don't know if it could be used to help out with that project to get it.
That's very cool because it's sexy and it's helpful. Like
Yeah.
you know, and it puts them on a better footing, you know, maybe the construction costs up front are compensated because their power bills will be lower down the road, kind of a justification. So that's kind of a cool idea. I need to read more about that. Should I just Google news articles about the MLK expansion?
I don't know if there's
They're talking about it.
there may be something on the city website in regard to the MLK. expansion.
Okay, I'll look there. You're so disembodied sitting behind the camera. We need to get you around the other side.
I'm sorry, I'm at the edge of it.
No, oh, got it. Okay.
I just see my gut every time. I'm like, man,
I'll keep my hand down here and move my finger when I'm talking.
Got it. For some reason, I thought you were around the other side.
Seems like we need some form of a process here. So there's a little bit of chicken or the egg, because, you know, how much does feasibility study cost? How much does that cost? A fraction of this would double it, right? So it seems like we have to kind of bird dog the ideas that we all have collectively to a group, distill that to 5 or 7 or something like that, and then put a number on to see where we're at, some form of that or the other. I have a suggestion more detailed than that, just putting all the ideas in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets, again, back to what PJ was mentioning as well, just kind of building some kind of a list of existing projects or ones that y'all think are meeting the criteria here.
So to put a point on that, are we doing that by next meeting? Is that what we're saying? Is-
Definitely have a start on it. I think this is going to be a process, I think, to get this one in.
Just switch to Verizon Business Unlimited. It is just
Ooh. Is there a mechanism where, without creating a bunch of work for all the city staff, is there a way to throw out give us your best idea for how this money could be used? Because I bet there are people working in city government right now would be like, oh, this, and just give them basic criteria. Something that's, going to benefit lower income folks and also be a real visible sign that we're a city that cares and we're trying to go green kind of thing. Maybe throw it out to some departments and see what you get fed back.
That's a good idea, and definitely not trying to move too quickly, but I don't think putting all the ideas in the middle is going to the end, right? So the suggestion would be that everybody produce their ideas. That would be part of the process, right? And at that point, we have all the ideas. And then we talk about them and say, oh, we don't want to try to create a budget around 30 different ideas. Find out which one's next meeting. So just like chewing the elephant sort of thing. If it makes sense to the group, maybe by the next meeting, if we could just respond to a prompt from you in an email, what are your top 5 ideas on how to spend the money? And the one Jessica mentioned, asking the departments, is a really good one too, because there's things we don't even know, right? So
I would say, just for the sake of not doubling the work, I would suggest we wait until David gives us a list of current scheduled upcoming projects down the pipeline. So that way we know if these things are already on the to-do list, we're not sending you 30 iterations of that same project. If we get a list from you that says, this is what is on the slate, and then we send in, then we send you our top ideas, and then we have those 2 lists. I think that way it may just save you a little bit of effort of, hey, we all said we should do, solar panels on the MLK gym. Well, look, it's already kind of here on the slate.
Yeah.
And then that way it just reduces the amount of cross-referencing you have to do and compiling stuff. I think it just simplifies it by one step. I don't disagree at all with what Evan, like, as far as that being the process. I think that's a good idea. And I would think, I don't know, but I would think that soliciting opinions from the city employees should be as easy as just like a survey monkey survey.
Yeah.
Server, just one question. Here, there's a grant available with these parameters, is there, what's your top idea?
I think it's simpler than that.
Okay, perfect.
It's a handful of people with a phone call.
There you go.
Or a meeting, something like that. We could. But yeah, so I think that's easy enough for us to develop. And the other thing is, we don't have to put all the eggs in one basket.
Right.
I mean, you can split this up,
Yeah, that's a great point.
3 or 4 different ways. It's just, when we got the funding from ARPA, not that the amount is even comparable, because it was a lot more,
Right.
but that's what we did. We had a standing committee of city staffers, and we developed exactly through this same sort of process. Here's the criteria, here's some options, what rises to the top? And so we can do the same thing. And we presented, I mean, that pot of money was split up, a whole bunch of
that. I
different
got
ways.
some,
So,
not
yeah.
me, but the co-op did, and I saw that.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive, actually.
So I think we can come up with at least a starter list within a month.
Okay, cool. Let's do that.
And part of my reason for the question is that there's gonna be continued pots of money that show up.
Yeah, I was just gonna bring that up. This isn't gonna be the only grant. The other ones may be competitive grants, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of other funding opportunities coming.
And if we don't have a list of projects, it takes us a lot longer to respond and react.
Agreed.
Yep.
All right, should we move on to item number 3, sustainable municipal building policy? Turn that over to David.
Yeah, this is an area that's already has some movement from within the city. I know Tom has asked us to, get some movement on this in regard to perhaps getting it in front of the city council here in the next few months. So it's a policy that's gone through a few different iterations and based on, feedback from our internal sustainability committee. But we definitely have it kind of based off the U.S. Green Building LEED guidance certification process. Trying to not be too prescriptive about it as far as, you've got to go for, these specific credits necessarily. I think I do call out a few of them, which I think are critical to meeting our city goals and our clean, not only greenhouse gas emission goals, but clean energy goals. And just be able to provide a direction for future municipal new construction as well as major renovation policies. So it doesn't necessarily address our existing buildings, but going forward, any like new construction or major renovations would be guided by this policy. So I don't know if y'all had a chance to read through it entirely. It's
I was curious about the projects, the applicability, projects 5,000 square feet and over, city council and grant a waiver. I guess that applies to less than 5,000 square feet. Just need to see what it is. So I'm curious, what would constitute, what would create the need for a waiver?
good question. I think it's, I'll let you talk as well, but not putting council too much up against them. I know that's fitting. I don't know if you have any feedback or thoughts.
No, yeah, I mean, I think we have to provide them that waiver. I can tell you that the return on investment is going to be a question that they're going to continually ask.
A follow-up to that then is, do we have someone that is qualified to provide full life cycle ROIs, not basic ROIs? The big thing with LEED, their big justification with LEED is that a LEED certified building is significantly cheaper to operate over the life cycle of the building. So if they're just looking at, well, it costs us $20 million to build a building that's not LEED certified and $25 million to build a building that is LEED certified, if that's the only information they're getting, then they're going to build a non-LEED certified building.
Just reconcile on that consultant true cost accounting pilot project. What he's saying is really critical. It's apples to oranges, right? The way that we're used to looking at value propositions is not actually the impact of what we value, right? So if we actually outline that and take it to the end and say, here's an example of what it used to look like when we looked at, ROI, and here's an example of what it looks like now that we have broadened the scope of what we value, that would be really impactful. I think we can get to the end of that pretty simply.
And part of the LEED certification process is that a LEED engineer should be providing the city with those details as far as what the estimated life cycle cost of the building should be. But that would, you would have to begin the LEED process to get to that stage. So if they get a very, an initial RFP that just says LEED certified building this much, non-LEED certified building that much, they don't get to that point of here's what our, overall operational and total life cycle cost is. So I think that's where the vagary of this verbiage concerns me. Is that city council may grant a waiver, doesn't give reasons why, doesn't, you know what I mean? It's just very, it's kind of like a letter that we send to Duke Energy that says, yeah, you guys should make more green energy, if you can.
Detail on that is important. And to layer to that, I see this through the soil and water work a little bit, or through the county. And we push lead development type stuff, and the county's up here with it. They just kind of don't. There's an innate resistance to spending more money to do the right thing, right? It's just part of the equation that we have to wrangle somehow, because that's what we're sitting here talking about, right? How are we supposed to do what we're being asked to do? We can't have everyone see the value of that, right? So that exercise of actually illustrating the value, again, is just top shelf, I think. And within that, it seems like there's maybe two ways to go about it. You don't want to back city council into a corner ever, right? So there has to be kind of an escape route, if you will. I understand that. And it seems like you could do that. I noticed the shall language versus the should language, right? It's like, that had to be delivered on some level, which is kind of, I was encouraged to see the shall, right? Because what we deal with through the soil and water end of it is like, the school system has LEED policies, but they're all should, and they've never done anything with it. It's just sat there in a book that they aren't even aware of, right?
Yeah.
Which we run the risk of here and nobody wants. So when I saw that, it's interesting. I didn't really reconcile it with the waiver piece, but that was the escape clause rather than the should language. But it's sort of the same thing. So to your point, it's like, what do we really, how do we define the value, which gets to the cost effectiveness? And then how do we define sustainability, right? Because that's a dangerous, slippery slope, right? I mean, it's already been greenwashed to the end. And I just wonder if, really getting literal with that would allow us to follow through in a meaningful way. We don't have a foundation on those 2 points. It's really tough to be
I mean, I'm 100%,
literal.
I 100% understand that there can't be concrete, have to do this no matter what. As a city council, they won't be able to accept that. I mean, I'm fully aware of that, but I think what I've seen over the years is you have to make this as specific as possible as to why, as to the qualifications to get you to, we need this escape clause, or we need this flexibility. If it's just when city council feels like they need to go outside this boundary, they're gonna go outside this boundary. That makes it very ambiguous, and that leads to it's much more subjective than it should be.
I think that makes sense. I just want to add one more time around the track also. What an anecdote from the soil and water into the county is, why don't we do more LEED certified building construction? We went to them with the new once in a lifetime opportunity with the government building we're building. And they didn't want to hear it, which is really unfortunate. And I could go a long time talking about how unfortunate that is, but the point is, there was no trigger to understand value. There was no platform to even begin with something like this, right? Which was part of the problem. But it all falls back to that, that idea of being able to have an understanding of what we're working with. So, through that county moment, I think that's what it comes down to, the sustainability piece and the ROI piece. Somebody can do that math for sure.
I just think that's gonna have to be, it's part of city council's mandate to responsibly use taxpayer dollars.
And
So no, they're not going, they don't want to spend more on a building than they have to, because that's an irresponsible use of taxpayer dollars. But they have to be able to be presented with it has to become part of the process that they're getting a full life cycle cost return ROI versus just a basic recoup on the cost, because otherwise, and if they get that, LEED looks good. LEED is cheaper. It's the same thing when we were looking at gas gas cars versus electric cars. When you look at the initial cost, the electric car is more. When you look at the life cycle and the cost of operation, the electric car is way less. It's the same idea. They just have to get to that point where they're getting that information and not just the purchase price.
Right, and then I'm sorry, there's one more piece. It's not always city council. It's also the pressures that city council feels, right? So a lot of the feedback of why we don't want to do lead through the county is that developers don't want to spend the money to do it. Like, we actually got that answer, which is real, you know? So like city council should be able to have an out, but as city council, I'm just gonna say it because this is the way it comes to me. It's like, where is the allegiance? Is it to the actual commitments that we made through this, or is it to the people who don't want to spend money? And how do we play in that reality without being as explicit in ways that we might want to? It's part of this, you know, and it's part of, it can be impacted by how it's written, I guess is what I'm driving at.
Great points. Yeah, I know I've seen other policies written in regard to waivers. They've said things like if the project is X percentage above budget, the waiver can be granted. You know, various kind of a little bit more specific in regard to, I don't know, a line that has to be crossed before they could grant that waiver. So I don't know if additional definition in regard what would be required in order to grant a waiver. Would you like to see some language in there?
I think as you go through this process of developing this policy, I just think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, because even if you were to go to who's drafting this and say, yeah, we just want this clause to say 20% above budget, then they grant a waiver. Well, you actually need to say 20% above the full life cycle cost, because 9 out of 10 projects will probably cost more than 20% more than.
Actually, no.
Okay.
We've got, well, at least according to some of the research, and I've actually started a draft on a presentation for council as well. And
Sure.
that references some studies out there that show, on average, you know, the higher certification level you go, the higher the cost.
Sure, obviously.
We're suggesting just lead silver. Yeah. So, which are the majority of the projects
Mhm.
out there. And on average, I think they've shown that it's 2% above. Which is, you know, quickly make that up in operational costs.
So I guess one suggestion, pay attention to the life cycle cost analysis that's written in here, and that definition, I'll be satisfied. If on page 4. I think
Yeah,
that-
I would just point out quickly also, I mean, it literally opens with the goal of this policy is to yield savings. So as soon as you start talking to these guys about, you know, I'll spend $10 to get 20 later. I mean, I think I'm just saying, I think that's good. It's right there built into the very first part. But the whole point is to save the city money overall. But then the key is working with the developers, you know, do they see this as a huge headache? Do they push back on it? And that's kind of what Evan was saying. And then I don't know if on the waiver, if you can sort of have a generic phrase, you know, unless there is a very compelling, you know, immediate reason, these policies shall be adhered. And if there's a compelling or immediate reason, then a waiver will be considered, or something where we really slow them down if they try to do waivers too broadly. But anyway, keep going. I just wanted to raise those 2 points.
So I think the discussions that Dave and I have had over the years is that we would try to use the resources we have to make the case in terms of life cycle costs.
Yeah.
Using the ClearPath tool as a mechanism to help demonstrate the difference between 2 options, as an example. But yet that is historically and admittedly, we haven't done a very good job of doing that at all. You know, we can finish a design, we can build a building, and we can occupy it, but what we haven't done historically very well is fully document and know what it's gonna cost to operate that facility for the next 40 years. Much less make decisions on that before we start breaking ground. So I think I agree. I think that's key to this whole process.
You gotta be able to tell that story, or we're just, you know, saying the world should work a certain way. Right. It just doesn't work.
Bearing in mind also that this all could be moved if we move over to PPD, so maybe we should don't get too bogged down in the details, right? If the city relocates to an existing facility.
Not necessarily, I mean, we're still gonna have to build buildings eventually, you know, and we are still going to have existing buildings.
Yeah, and you're right, that move will change things, Jessica, you're right, but,
I still think this policy, we should be working on it. I just want to bear in mind that
yeah, understood. I'm in a separate track, I'm working with a subcommittee of city staff that will help develop operating costs based on our actual costs for city facilities citywide, based on what the engineering drawings show. Right, so we know that up front. Instead of people guessing about it, you know, the operating staff develop a list of unit prices, and the project engineer develops what those operating costs are based on what the drawings show. So that's almost at the finish line right now. So if we take that and use that with Dave's ClearPath tool, I think we can get a lot closer to this definition back here. And if that gets presented as part of the product, right? Not just, we got 3 bids, here's the lowest responsible bidder. But here's the whole picture. Here's how much it costs you to construct it, here's how much it costs you to operate per year.
Right. And you know, one more beat on the developer piece of it, because it does convolute this a little bit. And then, you know, the challenge is asking them to spend more and them not be able to realize the return, right? I mean, that's why value engineering is the thing. It's like the worst word ever. But, you know, it's like find out a way to make things cheaper and make it still work. But I understand why that is because of that, right? So in that reality, what we don't want is for us to have to pay back the externalities that are created by that value engineering by not having a policy that doesn't mandate development of it, right? So that's, I think, the challenge of this document. I'm just reflecting a little bit on how difficult that might be, you know? Because at the end of the day, I don't think it's really about putting city council in a corner. It's about being willing to put developers in a corner. And that's not a negative thing in terms of the level that we expect to be attained, you know? That's a choice. And we start writing, you know, shall language into documents, it can become pretty strong. So I don't know, I guess that's more of a general statement of endorsement towards really putting some teeth into something that will make us do what we economically don't always want to do. You know, it's a difficult thing to approach, so I'm gonna be curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I know lead buildings here at Cape Fear region are probably kind of few and far between, but that's, you know, I think that has been driven somewhat by some of the developers in the area, but it's certainly, you know, become more standard in other areas as far as new construction, particularly in the commercial space where Class A office buildings nowadays almost have to be some kind of green design and certification. And you know, I think one of the areas that I think is really important highlights in here is that post occupancy commissioning of the facility. So you can design any kind of energy efficient buildings, but if it's not operated in the means that it was designed to operate, that, you know, all of that's right out the window, so.
Dave, I was just curious, you know, you were talking about, you have a subcommittee that's putting together like a pricing, life cycle pricing tool. Are they digging down as far as things like, because I know like LEED talks about how if you use one of their preferred materials, typically you get a longer lifespan out of it. So I'm just curious if your team is looking at things like, for example, okay, we replace shingles every 25 years, but if you use a Energy Star certified white shingle, it doesn't deal with as much heat and wear and tear, so it lasts 25 years. Are they looking at things like that? You know, are they factoring that kind of deep down into things? Because I think that's where some of the value from the like LEED building materials comes from, and I could be wrong, but I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, our efforts not that sophisticated.
I didn't.
Yeah. So we're simply looking at, you know, we've got 500,000 square feet of building.
Yeah.
And we know that it, based on how much staff, how much materials and how much contracts we spend every year, that it costs us this much per square foot to run HVAC.
Sure.
So then we apply that to a new building that's gonna be 10,000 square feet.
Sure.
And we estimate this is just for operating costs.
Gotcha.
We take that number and we use it as a forecast to say, when this building comes online, it's gonna cost us X amount for HVAC, X amount for pest control, X amount for plumbing maintenance. So it is not that sophisticated. The operating departments, they do get a chance to look at, you know, here's what the facility is gonna look like, if we have any comments.
Right.
So those comments do get put in. Don't put in this sort of fitting in the bathroom, because
Right,
we've
right.
had lots of, you know,
Right.
we have that interaction that does exist.
I wonder if that's the case, it sounds like that would not actually be a good tool to utilize if you're presenting life cycle costs to city council, because the buildings that you're building the estimates off of aren't LEED certified. But it could be a good compare and contrast, whereas if you're, you know, hey, our lead engineer says it's gonna cost us $1.50 a square foot to run this building, you know, here's our, you know, on the average of our buildings, it costs us $2.50 a square foot to operate these buildings. It can be a good counterbalance as to
Right.
justify.
It's part of the measuring stick.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say also is that I think it's a good thing to give council a choice.
Mhm.
And I'll use the MLK gym as an example. We're designing that building to be solar ready. So the roof and the structure are prepared to add the load from the additional weight on the roof. And we may ask bidders to give us a price to go ahead and put the panels on it. And then depending on the budget, depending on council's feeling, they can either choose to fund it or not. You know, what they don't like is not being given the choice. In other words, if we make the decision, oh, we're not going to do solar on this roof because we know we don't have a budget for it. We think it's a possibility, then you know, we have ways of building it into contracts so that we can at least understand what the pricing would be and then allow council
To make
the
that
opportunity to make a decision.
Sure.
Yes, so the point of bringing this draft in front of you all today was to get this feedback and need some notes here on areas that provide do some edits in here. Next step in our process, Dave, is I don't know if we need to bring it back to this group to get a move on, recommend moving it forward to, I mean, what's, after this, would it be back to EMT or as far as getting eventually the process to get it?
I think definitely we need to bring it back here because there's some tweaking that needs to occur. And then we can talk to Tom and deep down and ask him. It may not have to go back to EMT, but
It's the executive management team.
Sorry.
Talking after.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so, yeah, thanks for those comments. That was all that I had on the draft policy.
I had a request for some upcoming meeting, doesn't have to necessarily be the next one, but I would be curious to see, I know that you've been tracking and working on energy efficiency retrofits in the government buildings. I would ask if we could get a list of either, well, I think it'd be more useful to have a list of areas that you've identified that still have yet to be taken advantage of. The main reason I'm asking is, Duke offers these energy efficiency rebates. And so I think it would be helpful if we can know what areas, what low-hanging fruit you may have left through that program. We could make a recommendation to city council to allocate some funds for you to take advantage of that program.
Okay.
Seems to me like if Duke is willing to give us, in some cases, like 40 to 60 cents on the dollar back, then it would, the sooner city council does it, the sooner they reap those savings and get their buyback.
Yeah.
So I think it's just something I would like us as a committee to look at, because if it's something that we can use our position here to help advocate for, I think it's worth advocating for.
Get that updated for IRB.
Great.
Next week, yeah. Just quick update, yeah, I think we kind of got an area we're looking at for this fiscal years, which I have to spend the next few months here. And in July, we'll have a fresh batch of
Sure.
funds.
Yeah.
So,
Sounds good. We don't have anything else, so I will move to adjourn.
one quick thing.
Absolutely.
I know, mentioned this before, we are currently missing one member of
Yes.
the committee.
Yep.
I do know that the city clerk has been in contact with the mayor more than one time, probably several times, about this missing person, missing committee member. I'll just reiterate something I know I've said this to y'all before, I think. That if anybody here knows of somebody that would be interested in serving, that please lead them to us and we can lead them to the application.
which I think I sent that link around to everyone pretty recently. If anybody needs that refreshed as far as a link to the application page for the committee,
So
let me know.
Quite frankly, like, is the mayor having a hard time finding a qualified candidate or finding interest, or I guess I'll word it that way. Is there a lack of movement on the government side, or is there a lack of participation on the public side?
Well, it may be some of both.
Okay.
Quite honestly, and
Sure.
I'm not sure where
Yeah.
this ranks in priority in terms of what he's
Sure,
responsible for on
but
a daily basis.
More applications, the better.
Right. If we are able to help facilitate that, it's gonna happen for us
Sure.
a lot quicker.
Sure.
So I would just ask if y'all have ideas about people in the community that would do that.
Is it worth resending to the task force members?
We certainly can.
I'll put a plug out to my community. Probably be good to have someone who has at least a little bit of experience with environmental justice on this committee if possible. Obviously, we're trying to find someone who's just ready to jump in, but I'll definitely put a plug out, see if that helps.
Anything else? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks. Y'all have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
everybody.